Imagine this. You re on a packed New York City subway in 1914. You re shoulder to shoulder with people speaking English, German, Italian, Russian, Yiddish, whole world crammed into one noisy train car. Then one morning the headlines scream, Europe is at war. Names you've never heard like Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, are suddenly everywhere. Far across the Atlantic, armies are on the move. Trains are carrying soldiers, not commuters. And trenches are being dug from the North Sea all the way to Switzerland. Back in that subway car, people start glancing at each other, wondering. If their old homelands are now enemies, what will their new home America do? This is where the American story of the First World War begins. When the war breaks out in the summer of 1914, the United States is officially at peace. President Woodrow Wilson declares that the country will be neutral in thought as well as in action. And a lot of people agree. Parents who lived through the Civil War don't want to see their sons shipped overseas to fight. Millions of recent immigrants feel torn. Some have family in Germany or Austria-Hungary. Others have relatives in Britain, France, or Russia. Taking sides would feel like choosing between old roots and new loyalties. At first, the Atlantic Ocean seems like a pretty good shield. American farms are busy producing wheat and corn. Factories are churning out steel and machinery. Life goes on. You can still go to a baseball game, catch a vaudeville show, or watch a silent film. But slowly, the war starts to creep into American life. Our trade begins to lean heavily toward the Allies Britain and France because the British Navy controls the seas. American ships carry food, materials, and goods to Europe. American banks loan money to the Allies. So, while we were neutral in name, our economy was already picking a side. Then, out on the open ocean, something new and terrifying changes everything: the German submarine or U-boat. These underwater weapons don't play by the old rules of war. They can't just warn a merchant ship before attacking. Germany declares the waters around Britain a war zone and warns that any ship entering might be sunk. Americans read these warnings in the paper, but many still board transatlantic liners, trusting that their flag will protect them. In May 1915, that trust is shattered. The British passenger ship, the Lusitania, is torpedoed off the coast of Ireland. Over 1,000 people lose their lives, including more than 100 Americans. Shock and anger sweep across the United States. In Congress, some politicians call for war. Others plead for caution, warning against getting dragged into Europe's fight. Under pressure, Germany backs off its submarine attacks for a while, trying not to push America too far. In 1916, President Wilson wins re-election with a powerful slogan. He kept us out of war. It captured the feeling of a nation that desperately wanted peace. But beneath the surface, the tension was building. By early 1917, Germany was in a tough spot. The war on land was a brutal stalemate, and the British blockade was strangling its supplies. So German leaders made a huge gamble: unrestricted submarine warfare. They announced their U-boats would sink any ship near Britain, including American ones. They hoped to win the war before the U.S. could even get its boots on the ground. At the same time, a secret message was intercepted by British intelligence, the Zimmermann telegram. It was a proposal from Germany to Mexico. If the U.S. entered the war, Germany suggested Mexico should join their side. In return, Germany would help Mexico reclaim territories it lost to the U.S. decades earlier. When this telegram went public, Americans were stunned. Suddenly, the war in Europe felt dangerously close to home. The combination was explosive. American ships were being sunk. American lives were being lost. And now, a foreign power was trying to turn our neighbor against us. Faith in neutrality crumbled. President Wilson, the same man who once urged neutrality in thought, now stood before Congress and declared that the world must be made safe for democracy. In April 1917, after nearly 3 years on the sidelines, the United States declared war on Germany. Now came the massive challenge. America had a tiny army compared to the colossal forces that had been fighting for years. So the government passed the Selective Service Act, the draft. Across the country, men reported to local boards, got their numbers, and waited for the call. Training camps popped up seemingly overnight. Open fields became drill grounds. The daily routine for millions of young men became marching, shooting, and military discipline. Back on the home front, the entire country mobilized. A War Industries Board took charge of production. Railroads were managed to get troops and supplies where they needed to go. Farmers were urged to grow more food, and people in cities planted victory gardens in their backyards. Posters called for meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays to conserve food for the troops. Families bought war bonds, loaning their money to the government to fund the war effort. Women stepped into new roles on an unprecedented scale. With so many men gone, they took jobs in factories, offices, and on public transit. They served as nurses near the front lines, worked as telephone operators, and rolled bandages for the Red Cross. Their vital contributions added powerful momentum to the fight for women's right to vote. If they were essential to the nation at war, they deserved to be full citizens at the ballot box. But the war also highlighted deep divisions. African American men served eagerly, hoping to prove their patriotism, yet they faced segregation and racism. Many were assigned to labor units, but some combat units, like the famous Harlem Hellfighters, fought with incredible bravery under French command, earning widespread respect. Across the ocean, the American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, began to arrive in France. At first there weren't many. They trained alongside exhausted Allied soldiers and saw for themselves the shattered villages and the muddy, scarred landscape of the Western Front. Pershing insisted that his troops fight as a distinct American army, not just as replacements for British and French units. Throughout 1918, the trickle of American soldiers became a flood hundreds of thousands, then over 1 million. These fresh, energetic troops began to tip the balance of the war. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched one last massive offensive, a desperate push to win before America's full strength could be felt. They made frightening gains, but the Allied lines held, thanks in part to American units fighting at key battles like Belleau Wood. Their U.S. Marines earned a fierce reputation for their grit and determination. As summer turned to fall, the Allies launched their final, decisive offensive. American forces played a huge role in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, a vast and brutal campaign through forests and fortified hills. The fighting was tough, the casualties were high, but the constant pressure slowly broke the German lines. And through it all, another enemy was spreading, a deadly influenza pandemic that swept through camps and cities worldwide, killing soldiers and civilians alike. By November 1918, the Central Powers were collapsing. Germany was facing strikes and mutiny at home. With the Allies advancing, powered by a steady stream of American men and supplies, the end was clear. Germany agreed to an armistice. And at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns on the Western Front fell silent. Soldiers cautiously climbed out of their trenches, listening to a quiet they hadn't heard in 4 long years. Back home, church bells rang and crowds poured into the streets in celebration. But for families who had lost sons, brothers, and fathers, the joy was mixed with profound grief. President Wilson traveled to Paris with a grand vision for a new world order. His 14 points, which included a League of Nations to prevent future wars. But while he was celebrated in Europe, he faced stiff opposition back home. The Senate ultimately rejected the treaty, and the United States never joined the League of Nations. The story of America in World War I isn't about a nation that rushed into battle. It's a story of a country that tried to stay out, only to discover that oceans couldn't insulate it from world events. It's the story of a nation that transformed itself, mobilized its people, and ultimately stepped onto the world stage as a major power, beginning a long, complicated conversation about its role in the world that continues to this day. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more dives into history. See you next time.